Hello students, this lesson is on mental health disorders, continuing where we started last week with the anger and the stress lessons. So we're going to learn a little bit more about specific disorders of the mental health today. So before we get started, is there any help for mental health disorders? Right? Very good question. Before we start getting into it, finding out details, maybe self-diagnosing, asking Dr. Google, is there any help? Quick answer to that is yes. However, so it's a caveat, a variety of drug classes can help with the symptoms of mental illnesses. For example, antidepressants, antipsychotics, amphetamines, mood stabilizers, lithium, etc. But they do not fix the mental illness. That's very important for you to understand. They don't cure it. They help with these symptoms. Some disorders are genetic. There is no cure. It is built into your genes. Some disorders can be helped with counseling, like talk therapy. And some can be helped with more extreme measures like cognitive brain therapy, electric shock therapy. They still do electric shock therapy, by the way, in case you thought that that was outdated. It's not. And it is effective in small doses. Okay? So first, this is something you need to know. All symptoms found in mental disorders are also found in neurotypical or normal life experiences. So this is not like, oh, these people are, experiencing a completely different kind of humanity. No. To qualify as a disorder or mental illness, symptoms must be so severe that they interfere with daily functioning. So what that means is that you could experience these things that we're going to talk about and think, oh, I must be mentally disordered. No, your symptoms must be severe enough that they interfere with your daily functioning. Otherwise, it's not a disorder. It's just normal human life, okay? So this definition is what you have to know about this section. Every mental disorder is something that is good or healthy or normal that has been taken to an unhealthy extreme, or it's the absence of something good, healthy, or normal. All right? I'm going to ask you to do a fill in the blank on the next test. So you need to know, it's something good taken to an unhealthy extreme, or is the absence of something good. So let's take the following emotions or problems. So if we take sadness, sadness is a normal, healthy emotion, right? Taken to an unhealthy extreme, it turns into depression. So nervousness and worry turns into anxiety. Anger, we talked about last week, turns into rageaholism. Distraction, hyperactivity, forgetfulness can be ADHD. Being happy or energetic can be a manic episode. Now, for an example of something where it's the absence of something good, you can look at narcissism, right? So we talked about narcissism. This is extreme selfishness and self-centeredness. The world literally revolves around them in their head. And so they have an absence or a lack of normal human empathy. They really don't care about other people. So that would be a mental disorder. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is depression. Now, remember I said it is an extreme, so sadness at times is normal. All of us are sad. And in fact, sometimes we may be sad for days or weeks or months. It doesn't count as depression unless it is so severe that it affects your daily functioning. Otherwise, it's just normal sadness. At some times in your life, feeling sad might be the most healthy, appropriate response you could possibly have to things like death. We talked about this with anger. Sometimes anger is the most normal, healthy response. Sadness to things like death or loss is normal. So what depression has several names. To extreme sadness is called either just normal depression, major depression or clinical depression to kind of differentiate it from so-called normal depression. Now, this is where it gets confusing for people because you might not realize that you or someone you love is depressed because you think, well, they don't seem sad. That's actually not the only symptom. And in fact, people can look depressed and be depressed without any feelings of sadness. So it could be feelings of hopelessness, feelings of loneliness, extreme loneliness to the point where you feel like you can't function. You could lose the ability to care about things. So I just can't care that I don't care, right? You have less interest in your normal life. If normally you like taking your dog for a walk when you're depressed, I don't really care. Dog can just sit in the corner. Difficulty sleeping is a big sign. This is where you're either sleeping too much or too little. That's obviously going to affect the next one, difficulty concentrating. If you're not sleeping enough, you're going to, it's a vicious cycle. But when you are depressed, it's very difficult to concentrate. Your mind is affected and you're not able to think logically. You might, with difficulty, care about something. For example, if a mother is depressed and her child brings her a like a little picture, look, mommy, look what I drew. You might not have completely lost the ability to care about that picture, but you have difficulty. And a lot of people who are in depression, they're not bad people. They try to make themselves snap out of it, just get better, whatever. And so you can still respond, oh, that's nice, honey, right? But inside, you really don't care. It might come out as feelings of increased irritation or anger. So this is where we talked about the anger iceberg. And I said that there can be a lot of things underneath the surface that come out as anger. Depression is one of those major things that comes out as anger. And finally, this is why depression is one of the most dangerous mental health disorders. It's potential thoughts of death, or what we call suicidal ideation. And we're going to talk about this more in another lesson. But this is where you get to the point where you just don't want to live anymore. And suicide becomes increasingly attractive seeming. And this is why depression is an indirect cause for a large number of deaths. Because as you remember, we talked about it for the causes of death in the United States. Suicide is a significant cause of death. So depression is dangerous. That's why if someone is depressed, you need to try to reach out to them and see if you can get them help, because there are things that help. Or if you're depressed, you need to reach out and ask for help, because it could cost you your life. So the next one we're going to talk about is bipolar disorder, or it used to be called manic depressive. So this is the internet, the official mental health internet definition I'm going to read to you. Bipolar disorder, formerly called manic depressive illness or manic depression, is a mental disorder that causes unusual shifts in mood, energy, activity levels, concentration, and the ability to carry out day-to-day tasks. Okay, so I'm just going to stop for a sec. Remember, it's only a disorder if it's severe enough to affect your daily life. So, this is severe enough. So 3 types of bipolar. I'm not mentioning those in this lesson. If you'd like to look them up, go ahead. All of them involve clear changes in mood and energy and activity. So the range of moods go from periods of being up, so you have elated, irritable, or energized behavior known as manic episodes, to very down. So sad, indifferent, or hopeless known as depressive episodes. And less severe manic are also known as hypomanic. So one thing I want you to realize about bipolar is that a person with bipolar, they think what they're doing is normal. Okay? That is a hallmark of this. They do not realize, quite often, especially in the manic episodes, that what they're doing is problematic. So bipolar is one of those things that tends to be diagnosed by other people around the person. And in fact, unfortunately, bipolar is one of the main disorders that people who do get diagnosed, they do get helped, they get given drug prescriptions that cause the symptoms to be much less. Bipolar is one of the main disorders where people go off their drugs voluntarily, and that leads to a lot of problems. All right, so let's talk about what kinds of symptoms you're seeing. On the right side, I have depressive symptoms. On the left, I have manic. You can see that they're very one-to-one correlation. So a manic depressive person is going to have periods where they go through a manic period and they'll experience a lot of things on the left, and they don't realize that they're acting abnormally. Okay, so feeling very up, high, or elated, they're happy, or they might be irritable. They have a lot of energy, increased activity, they feel jumpy or wired. They're acting like they're on some kind of drug, but they're not. This is like natural drug highs. They have trouble sleeping at all. So they just, their brain's going, right? They become more active than usual. They talk really fast about a lot of different things, and they do it in a way that's distinctive. This is one of the ways that manic depression is diagnosed. In a manic episode, the way they talk is distinctive. It's easy to tell it apart from other disorders. Being agitated, irritable, or touchy. So it's not just wouldn't we all love to have a lot of energy and happiness? And this isn't necessarily happy, okay? You can be a grouchy manic person. Um, Internally, they feel like their thoughts are going very fast. And they think, I'm going to take advantage of all this super brain I got going on with me. They think they can do a lot of things at once. Now, an external observer is probably going to have a different opinion about how well they are doing whatever the things they're doing. Okay? But to themselves, it makes total sense. And they feel like they're taking advantage of this great manic period. They also tend to do risky things during a manic episode. You see this with Hollywood people, the 30-minute weddings. People can spend all of their money in a 1 week manic period and then come down out of it and be completely financially ruined. Reckless sex. The manic periods are the dangerous ones in that way. Now, the depressive episodes are very similar to what we just talked about with depression, right? A little energy feels sad, down, empty, or hopeless, worried, empty, trouble concentrating, forgetting things, eating too much, or forgetting to eat, feeling tired or slowed down, again leading to death, thoughts of death or suicide. That's how depressive aspects are dangerous. Now, obviously, if you're going between things that like jumping off a roof to things like trying to kill yourself, this is not a kind of disorder you can just, grit your teeth and clench your fists and try to man up and get through it. You need help. These are dangerous cycles to be on. And the manic depressive person goes on these cycles on a fairly regular schedule, which means that they are going to be maybe weeks, maybe months, they're going to be experiencing these things. Now, one of the drugs that they use for manic depressive is lithium, and that's one of the ways they can tell whether someone is actually manic depressive, if lithium works for them. Most people, because remember, this is a disorder, but this is caused by a brain chemistry issue. And lithium is a metal, and for some reason, it seems to solve a lot of the problems in the brain that is happening from whatever's happening from this bipolar. However, ADHD looks a lot like this as well. And so if someone has been diagnosed bipolar but lithium doesn't work for them, if they try ADHD drugs and those work for them, the amphetamine class drugs, then it's very likely they actually have ADHD and not bipolar. Okay? So this is where it's a little bit tricky because some of these disorders look and sound like each other, but they're not technically. So the next one we're talking about is schizophrenia. Now, you might have heard about schizophrenia before, or schizophrenics. We're going to talk about schizophrenia as regards to marijuana use on another day. So let's talk about what schizophrenia is. Now, schizophrenia is to define it and diagnose it is tricky, all right? So I need you to know that before we start. The best definition I could find online is a fragmented pattern of thinking, and it looks very different for different people. And in fact, it might look very different for the same person in different phases. So there's 3 different phases. You can look that up online if you want. But to be diagnosed as a schizophrenic or with the mental health disorder of schizophrenia, remember the symptoms have to be severe enough to affect daily living. They have to have at least one of these 2 major symptoms, either delusions or hallucinations, or both. Okay, they could win the symptom lottery and get both of them, but they have to have at least one of those 2. So what are those 2? That's where we come into the clown, okay? Scary looking clown there. Hallucinations, all that means is seeing something that's not there. So a schizophrenic could be sitting in the living room, they see their mom come in from the kitchen, and somehow their brain interprets it as a scary clown coming in to kill them. Right? This is where schizophrenia gets dangerous, not necessarily to the schizophrenic. However, schizophrenics have a much higher rate of murder than any other mental health disorder. And it's not because they're murderous, it's because their hallucinations make them believe that situation is truly something completely different. So they just act in self-defense. Now, it's a hallucination. Mom's just standing there. She doesn't need to be stabbed like a murderous clown might need to be, right? She's just trying to give the kid a sandwich. But that doesn't help if the person's brain is lying to them. So that's what happens in a hallucination. Your brain is lying to you. Your brain is not taking the reality and portraying it. It's messing it up. Fragmented pattern of thinking. Okay, the other thing is a delusion. This is where you don't necessarily see the reality around you as wrong. You see yourself as wrong. So you have your standard, oh, this person believes they're Napoleon Bonaparte or Trump, okay? Unless you actually are Trump, believing yourself you are President Trump is a delusion. And nobody can believe that they are Napoleon Bonaparte and not be deluded now because Napoleon's dead, okay? So being a grand delusion, identifying yourself as someone else, is a pattern of thinking that's fragmented, and it's a sign of schizophrenia. Some of these other symptoms, now remember, these are very difficult to really categorize in one particular person. So you could have disorganized speech or behavior. Now, from what I've read anyways, schizophrenia has a very distinct kind of disorganized speech or behavior, different from your manics. Okay, so a manic person is going to be like, blah, 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 right? Schizophrenics are going to speak in a different way than that, and it's for a trained professional, it's easier for them to diagnose. They could have disorganized behavior. It doesn't make any sense to someone else. Catatonic behavior. What that means is that a schizophrenic person can go into a catatonic state where they could be sitting in their chair, you snap your fingers in front of their face, they don't even blink. It's like they're not there. The brain is checked out. It's gone. They're catatonic. They're like they're in a sitting, waking coma. Obviously, that's very different from having a inappropriate reaction. So somebody says, "Hey, my dog just died," and the schizophrenic might go, "Ha ha 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 ha," right? So that's an inappropriate reaction. Now, to the schizophrenic, it makes sense, but that's because their brain has a disordered, fragmented pattern of thought, right? So it doesn't make sense to other people. They can portray less emotions than normal people. They could have a decreased intensity of emotions than normal people. And so once you become schizophrenic, this is one of those things that it's a lifelong disorder. Now, you can take drugs that help. Helps get your memory, learning, and understanding, your other things to get back up to more normal range. But again, just like with bipolar, schizophrenics do not believe that there's anything wrong with them. You're the one that's wrong when you tell them they're not Napoleon or that their mother is not a murderous clown or whatever. Their reality is real to them. And so they're very, very difficult to help because they don't see the problem. They don't believe the problem. Now, in schizophrenics who've been committed to institutions, I've come into contact with some of them. They are forced often to take their meds, and that makes them into a space where maybe they can become a little bit more self-aware about their problems. But if they go off their meds, again, you have the same issue. They don't agree with your version of reality. This is a very, very difficult disorder to treat. And it's heartbreaking for people who love people who become schizophrenic. One of the things we're going to talk about is that schizophrenia comes on in, generally speaking, the teenage years. So someone is not schizophrenic as a child and they become schizophrenic as a teen or a young adult. That's a really hard thing. Okay, you guys are at this age. And so one of the things, the reason why I went over drugs so hardcore is that there's a very strong link in the article I'm going to show you on another assignment. There's a very strong link between marijuana use and developing schizophrenia. So if you are one of the people who are genetically prone to developing schizophrenia, you will definitely develop it if you combine that with the genetic problem with marijuana use. Because remember, marijuana acts on the brain. It is a psychoactive drug. And so it can actually create a mental health disorder. It brings it to the surface when maybe you might not have ever descended into schizophrenia. So it's very important for you guys to realize marijuana is a dangerous drug. Okay, so we'll talk about that more another day. The next thing we're talking about is dissociation disorder. So the web definition is a disconnect or a lack of continuity between thoughts, memories, surroundings, actions, and identity. People with dissociative disorders escape reality. I want you to notice that. They're escaping reality in ways that are involuntary, that means they're not choosing it, and unhealthy. That means it's not good for them. And it causes problems with functioning in everyday life. So that's why it's a disorder. It is so severe that it causes problems with daily life. Dissociation disorders are always a response to trauma. So if someone has a dissociation disorder, they have had trauma. Period. All right. So one of the most extreme form of dissociation disorders is called dissociative identity disorder. And so what happens with dissociation in general, dissociation itself is a form of self-protection. All right, so this is where it comes from, something that's good, healthy, and normal. It is a way our brain protects us from our current reality. Now, people who dissociate with their current reality, it is something that can be learned. For example, ER doctors, ER nurses, these people have learned to dissociate themselves with the reality of what's happening so that they can function better. So dissociation is the way that we space ourselves out from the reality, the hardness of what's happening around us. And that is the healthy thing. Now, dissociative identity disorders where, let's say and by the way, this usually develops only before the age of 7. You can't develop DID. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. Now it's called DID. You can't develop it after about the age of 7 because your brain isn't really, it's more congealed, I guess. But if you suffer an extreme trauma before the age of 7, In order to escape your reality, let's say a little girl is raped, okay? In order to escape reality, her brain fractures itself. This is a form of breaking your own brain in order to survive something that is simply unbearable. So you have some symptoms here. A sense of being detached from yourself and your emotions. Okay? Again, surgeons, ER doctors, this is where you're going to see that. Now, memory loss or amnesia, this is something that happens in for DID, the split personality, where certain parts of the brain take the memories of certain time periods and they hide it from the rest of the brain. This is how someone with DID can cope with and live with terrible trauma. They forget it. Okay? Now, obviously, it doesn't stay forgotten. That's why it's an issue. But that is how the brain tries to cope. The people and things around you can seem distorted and unreal. Let's say you're an adult and you're suffering extreme distress. You might start feeling disconnected from yourself, disconnected from what's happening. One of my friends, this actually happened to her in the middle of a very difficult period of time. And she started asking me, I'm feeling like I'm not real. What's going on? And I said, I think you're dissociating, honey. I think you need to see a therapist. And that's kind of what it turned out to be. So this happens from significant stress or problems. It also causes significant stress or problems in your life. Because, for example, if you have DID and you've split into different personalities or alters, whatever you want to call them, that's going to cause problems with other people. Also, people with DID or dissociative disorders do not cope well with stress. They already have a fractured brain. They've fractured their own brain to survive something, and extra stress, not good. It leads to things like depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and behaviors. Okay, so let's talk about anxiety now. So worry is the normal thing that we're going to talk about. Intense, extreme worry is called anxiety. So here's the different kinds of anxiety disorders we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about each one. So panic attacks. This is where you have sudden onset, extreme anxiety to the point where it becomes a feeling of panic. So your severe physical symptoms, fight or flight. So we talked about that with the anger. Your adrenaline starts working, your norepinephrine, you've got cortisol coursing through your body. Something in your brain triggered you into a belief that your life was in danger. And then your body responded like it would to save yourself. Now, if a bear is actually running at you and you need to run away or whatever, that's not a panic attack. That's a normal response to a deathly situation. A panic attack is where you have that response and there is no, a, deathly situation happening. You've tricked yourself, unfortunately, into believing that your life is in danger when it's not. So how do you cope with that? The first thing you need to do is speak truth to yourself. Now, you are not doing this consciously, but you can consciously fight back against it. So you speak truth to yourself. If you got panicked into or triggered into a panic attack for a test, then you tell yourself, I am not going to die taking this test. I'm going to walk out of here. Okay? Whatever your situation is, speak truth to yourself. Remind yourself why it's not a lethal situation. Your brain is a powerful tool. You have to use it. So I'm going to give some more things in a sheet. But one of the things you can do, and I'm telling this to you guys not because I necessarily believe you'll have panic attacks, but if you have a friend, you can help them as well. So count 5 things you can see. Then you count 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. I want you guys to memorize that because you may need to help somebody someday. The next anxiety disorder we're going to talk about are phobias. Extreme fear. So remember, fear is a normal, healthy thing. It's a good response to threatening situations. But when that is taken to an extreme, then you are in mental illness territory, and that's going to be called a phobia. Now, there's actually 3 different kinds of phobias, and you might not have been aware of that. The one portrayed by the cockroach, I apologize if cockroaches are someone's phobia. I was just trying to give an example, is a specific phobia. So this is a intense and unreasonable fear of a specific trigger. So bugs, bats, etc. Again, it's unreasonable because, yeah, that's a picture of a bug, but I can squash it, okay? It's unreasonable. I'm not actually in danger. My level of fear does not match what reality is. That's why it's a mental health disorder. Your thinking, your feelings are disordered. They're not matching reality. Another kind is social anxiety disorder. You're going to see that where you have people, if they have social anxiety disorder, they might have good reasons to fear social situations. When that becomes a crippling fear that it affects your daily life because it's so extreme, that's when you get into social anxiety disorder. All of us. You know, you talk about the dream where you have to get up and stand in front of the class and then you find out your pants aren't on, okay? All of us have a certain amount of social anxiety for different situations. That's normal, okay? This is a phobia when it gets extreme. And the last one is agoraphobia. So fear of being in an unsafe situation. So a lot of people think agoraphobia is a fear of going outside. It could, or the fear of going into a small space. I'm agoraphobic. I can't go in the elevator, right? If you've ever seen the Disney movie called Nim's Island, N-I-M, Nim's Island, the main character is Nim, who's a little girl, and an author, a woman author, played by what's her name? Jodie, anyways, Jodie something. And so the author is agoraphobic. You can watch the movie, see what you think of it. She is afraid because in her mind, her only safe place is inside her house. And so the whole movie is basically kind of exploring what does it take to get this agoraphobic author out of her house and across the world to help the little girl. So that's called Nim's Island. So these are your kinds of extreme fear phobias. Jodie Foster, that's the name. I knew it would come to me if I stopped poking at it. Okay. Now, obsessive compulsive disorder. So the definition here is it's an anxiety disorder where people have recurring unwanted thoughts, ideas, or sensations. These are the obsession part that make them feel driven. They must do something repetitively, and that's the compulsion. That's why it's obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay? So, for example, the Monk TV show, if you guys have ever seen that, I recommend you watch a few episodes. The main character of that is called Obsessive Compulsive Detective because he's a detective with OCD. And he uses his OCD in order to solve crimes. So you can see in some parts of the show his OCD behaviors. So one of the things, washing hands, opening and closing doors or locks. It's not, none of us, when we say, oh, I'm OCD about this, none of us are actually telling the truth there. It has to affect your daily life because it's so severe that you must do these things. For example, you say, oh, I'm OCD about cleanliness, so I have to wash my sink. You could be telling the truth. If, for example, you have a pattern where you take the bleach and the sponge and you start at the top and you go to the bottom and you do exactly 5 times in exactly the right order. And if you miss it a spot or if you don't do it enough times, you have to start all over again. Okay, that is OCD. So this is a disorder. This is a problem. It's a mental health disorder. Okay, it's not a joke. Now we can have, traits where maybe we're feeling, uncertain about something. So we sit and fidget with our hands or we pick at our nails or whatever. We're doing these compulsions that we're trying to deal with worry. That's normal. Okay, nail chewing is normal. Following the pattern on wood grain for 3 hours to kind of cope with whatever thoughts you're having. That was in a book I read once. That's not normal. That's where you're getting into disorder stage. Okay, now post-traumatic stress disorder, this is something I'm not going to talk about very much today because I have a whole lesson about this when we talk about trauma. But it's called post-traumatic because it's a response to trauma. So something bad happens, and this is your response. The stress disorder comes in when you have been exposed to trauma. You cannot have PTSD unless you've had trauma. Okay? So we'll talk about that more. And finally, these are the ones that I'm not talking about today, but I wanted to mention them to you. You guys are free to do your own research. We will be spending more time in class talking about two of these. We will talk about autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder more in class. But these other ones, borderline personality, antisocial personality, they're very similar to each other. You can look them up. Eating disorders, I'm not going to talk about. Obviously, that's where you have a disordered relationship with food. Most of the time, it leads to people starving themselves to death. And it's not about the food. It's about other problems in your life that you respond to by starving yourself. Mostly it's a control issue, to be honest. You feel out of control in your life, so the one thing you can control is how much you eat. Okay? And then finally, schizoaffective disorder, that's somewhat related to schizophrenia. You can look that up. So we've covered a lot of disorders. Go ahead and look up any more information on some of them and fill out your journal. Okay? Talk to you guys later. Bye.